We're screwed, bro.
What?
We
Yeah.
are screwed. We are
What'd you
screwed. I
see?
mean, beyond not fixable kind of. We're screwed, bro. And I'm not. I haven't lost my post meal stuff. I'm just saying we're screwed. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know why. I hate the fact. You remember in the guy in the Matrix, and he says he goes and meets
Mr.
with Smith,
Yeah.
and he
Yeah.
Matrix 1, and he's like, "Thank you so much." He wants to get plugged back in. He's
Right.
like,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The guy that's like, it's just the steak. I need a steak.
I need a steak. I know
Yeah.
it. My mind. I know it's not real steak, and it doesn't matter. You know, ignorance is bliss, right? Just give it to me,
Right.
and I'll just give me the steak and plug me back in.
That's such a well-written speech.
Because it's real.
Yeah.
It's real. I mean, so here's what's happened. I've been sending. Did you get some of the stuff I sent you? Like I've been sending you some texts from the Moynihan report. I don't know if you saw that. Was it you that told me about the Moynihan report originally?
I don't think it was. I don't see anything.
Oh,
wait, is Daryl Brown the Moynihan report?
No.
No, so
No. Oh, I sent you the 20-year revolution from Roosevelt to Eisenhower.
yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay, so anyway, this is. Oh, what'd you send me on the Pope, consumer materialism, and the Christian hope? Fisher Lectures, 1988. What is that?
Yeah, it's the Pope in 1980. It's the guy who eventually became the Pope. He wasn't the Pope yet, but he basically puts his finger on that we have a cosmology problem, and his evidence is that other eras didn't have drug problems. You don't get a drug problem unless people are dislodged from reality. A drug problem is, so it's a really cool argument where he just says, you know, in the Middle Ages, we believed we had a place. And now people that believe they have no place are willing to numb themselves with drugs. So, but you don't numb yourself with drugs if you actually have hope that there is a place that you can go to find satisfaction.
Okay, so can we put we're doomed on this corner just of the table right now? Just put it over there.
Yeah.
And I want to speak on this a little bit because this was on my mind too, and I'm going to talk to you about it. The whole Grammys. You were out of town, so you probably weren't paying attention, but I'm sure it had to pop up in your somewhere.
It popped up. A couple of people tagged me in things and said, "Oh my gosh, did you see how nuts this is?" Because they're like, Laura needs to succeed. You've got this demonic stuff, and you know, I have two. There are layers to my reaction to it. But
yeah, me too. Go ahead. What's yours first? Yeah. What's yours first? You go first.
The first one was, well, I remember Marilyn Manson, right? I remember
facts.
This is not the first time that they have used Satanism for marketing purposes. You have the Grammys becoming completely irrelevant. Nobody's watching. Nobody cares what's going on. It's become just musicians basically giving awards to other musicians.
Elite night for elites.
Right, yeah. And everybody's starting to realize that and not care. And all of a sudden it's trending again on Twitter, right? Because of this. But here's what was crazy, right? So Oscars are trending on Twitter. I had to get down to the 2000th text before I found anything about the Sam Smith and you know the like invocation of the devil stuff, right? Like you're that's a long ways in. So even though it's trending on Twitter, they're still trying to suppress it. And it was, you know, it was like, you know, I saw Elon Musk saying,
Yeah.
saying he said, I still haven't gotten to the bottom of the algorithm. We'll probably have
Right.
to replace it because
Yeah.
it's so it's just so nefarious.
Yeah.
If
I know he was
the
talking about that
owner
with the
of
blue checks.
yeah, right. The owner of Twitter is saying, man, this is one incredibly complex algorithm that has been nudged into further and further nefarious ends. And the best thing we can do is probably just pull it out and put a new algorithm in that really has to do with engagement and not pushing an agenda. But you can see, like, when I just the people I follow, they're posting it's everything in about the Grammys. The people, as soon as I click on, oh, the Grammys are trending, there's 4,500 posts mentioning the Grammys, and you're 2,000 in before you find anything about that. So they're using. So I have so the first layer is, man, this is an old marketing tactic, and it's working again, and that was my first response. But then you watch the actual video and you're like, but this is a new level of purposeful referencings of Satan. What were your thoughts?
Marilyn Manson was pretty bad.
He was.
So, I mean, which new level? Marilyn Manson was doing the trans thing before anybody ever thought to do it. He was already ahead of this in so many ways.
Right.
The devil stuff that he was, I mean, I'm not seeing anything new that he hasn't done already. So I kind of,
well, I think you had this time around, you have multiple people doing it at once. So that's part of it.
That's what I was going to say. I think that everybody's become Marilyn Manson is the thing.
Yeah,
not that there's anything new about the process. It's that it's all become Marilyn Manson, which is, I think that's, go ahead. What were you going to say?
And then you had CBS's tweet of it saying, we got Sam Smith coming out, let's get ready to worship.
Yeah.
Which before it was, you had the networks all at least pretending, hey, we didn't like that either. That was, you didn't have the networks saying, hey, we're in on this. And knowing they're going to get away with it, right? That whoever is in charge of the CBS Twitter account, which is probably some, 19-year-old intern, whoever's in charge of it, they leaned into it. That is the thing that I saw that I thought, that's new, that's different. It used to be that that this was an anti-institutional move, and all of the institution and individuals flocked to it, but the institutions all backed away. CBS fully leaned in.
That's part of why the other conversation that's on the edge of the table that we'll get to about us being screwed, because that comes all into it. I'm with you on everything. The other thing that the part for me that really bothered me was that there was a time that elites or the aristocracy or whoever was in charge, those higher I think elites would be the right name for them, who had power, had authority, or who had some sort of influence in culture, were always the ones who would push against the system for the sake of the people. So elites weren't bad. They didn't have to be bad. They were bad depending on how they acted. The idea of being an elite was like being a knight, or being someone who had a high moral foundation and ground that had authority in the position. Oh, you're grabbing books. We're hitting something.
No. I'm having my camera angle is getting.
Did you just prop up your camera angle with the book? Shame on you. It better be a Joel Osteen book. I promise you it better be.
It's just a thesaurus.
Okay, well, in that case. But when I saw this at the end of the performance with Sam Smith, it said produced by Pfizer.
That was so,
sponsored.
but that made me happy. I was like,
Yeah,
ah.
right. And so what used to be, I didn't see it so much as a problem with the stuff that's happening on the stage. I know what those folks are doing. Those folks are trying to invoke some sort of passion from their audience because their audience is numb.
Right.
And
yes.
so they do the shocking thing in order to get. This is part of what bothered me about this, is that we are the ones who made that popular. Everybody shared what Sam Smith did. Everybody shared the event because nobody else who was there was going to make it popular, right? We made it popular because we shared it, and they know
like
that.
Marilyn Manson. That
just like Marilyn Manson
with Marilyn Manson. The same thing happened with Public Enemy with their F the Police.
Yep. Yeah. And so what artists have done, artists know, and so this is where it gets back to me. I think that artists know now that if they write good music and work hard to produce good art, that the value of it is zero to the public and to the culture, right?
Because they're dropping it into a frozen wasteland of souls.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And because so then the artist doesn't work nearly as hard to give the effort to produce something and labor over something and sweat over it and give his life over it, so that when he comes out, his soul is wrapped inside of the plastic that's on the CD and intertwined inside of the recording that is at the studio. When you get it, you're hearing a part of them communicate about life, about humanity, a part of, they're trying to bring souls with them and attach to another person's soul. And so there isn't anything in the audience anymore that wants that kind of, or values that type of thing. It's not that they don't want it. They don't value it in the same way. And so what they have to do now in order to be able to get the attention, in order to be able to even get the sales, is they have to use shock values, shock and awe in order to get people to pay attention. I bet you the streams of that song went up drastically over that because everybody's like, well, what are the lyrics? What's going on? And it's like, it doesn't matter if you liked it or not.
It works. Right? Yeah. And it was NWA. I misspoke, not Public Enemy.
Public Enemy.
First off, I got to correct.
But I was thinking when you said NWA, you said NW, you said Public Enemy. I was thinking like they did have something about police, but it wasn't that.
No, that was not right. Yeah, it was the NWA where they purposefully then they released it at a spot where they knew they would get arrested. It's really smart, right?
Yeah.
But it is so there's the marketing aspect of it, but the problem is that kind of marketing works in this kind of environment.
Right, and that's what I mean.
If we want the marketing to quit working, then we got to change the environment, but you don't change the environment. Like there's not a switch. It's not a mechanical thing where you say, oh, we can go in and change the environment. And this is why I sent you that. It's that article where he was saying the drug war doesn't work. The reason the drug war doesn't work is because this is a cosmological, theological problem that we have. The fact that everybody's looking around and saying, like, is there a pill? Is there can I smoke something? Can I snort something? Like, what can change my relationship to the world? Because right now I'm floating detached from it.
It's the mechanistic thinking about there has to be just this thing I can insert inside of this machine that makes it work, right?
Right. That it at least makes it tolerable to be in this machine, right? So what that is, and so you have, and what the Ratzinger points to is he points to C.S. Lewis and said, so he's the only pope that's ever been removed. He also is the first pope after the Reformation to say, we probably should have listened to Martin Luther about justification.
Yeah, get this guy out of here. We want him gone ASAP.
So he also he put his finger on the fact that modernity as a whole, but communism in particular, is destructive to the human society and destructive to the human soul, right? So he but he,
Communism.
yeah, right. So he got removed because, but he pointed out that it's a cosmological problem, right? So he gets removed, and basically he goes into his prayer cave for the rest of his life. He comes out one time to say, just want to come out really quick because the spirit told me to make sure you guys all know not to listen to the current pope, and then he dies. So there hasn't ever been anything like that.
We don't talk about him
in the papacy, where he was saying he was trying to open up conversation between Protestants and Catholics specifically to discuss justification, because he thought Luther was wrong on ecclesiology, but he said, I think he's right on justification. And then that's when basically he was dethroned. So you have this really strange open door opportunity, I think, between Protestants and Catholics to actually have a substantive discussion that is shut down by the systems, but he's right that justification by faith and that a cosmology in which justification by faith makes sense when you had that, you didn't have drug problems, even when the culture itself wasn't particularly Christian,
right?
Because you didn't have the numbness that comes with modernity. Modernity it's been like sleeping pills. Everybody's wandering around on sleeping pills. I think the greatest poem of the 20th century about the 20th century was called The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot. And it's just a poem about the what modernity has done to humanity, right? That it's just completely dehumanized everything. And it was shocking at the time because everybody was like, oh my gosh, he's put his finger on it. But they still had the ability to take in poetry. But now we don't even really have the ability to take in poetry. So we need that shock to the system, but in the opposite direction somehow, right? How do you get so? Getting this is why I wanted us to read the Ars Poetica by Horace, because it's all about what how do art and virtue, how can virtue be communicated by art? That's what the Horace
is that on our booklet?
It is. That's on the book list. Yeah.
Okay.
Because I think that's the question. We see that art can be deforming in terms of virtue, or that it can bring out the worst parts of us. We see that. We don't have anybody really fighting back by saying, what would it look like for how has the wisdom of the ages taught us that virtue is communicated by art, that virtue is encouraged by art? What is it? How does that happen? And that's what Horace was writing about, or what he was trying to explain to this young man that says he wants to become a poet. It's like, well, let me tell you, if you're going to become a poet, your job is to a good poet is one who encourages virtue. But how does that work? You can't just say, this is virtue, that is virtue, this is virtue, that is virtue. You have to actually communicate it in such a way that people want to take in the teaching because they're enjoying it. Right? That the art itself connects with their humanity, and then you can teach them virtue. But said you can use art in a way that doesn't teach them any virtue and they enjoy it, but that's not of any use to anyone. What does it look like?
That's where we're at. We're making art right now.
Right. That's exactly. And so, in most Christian art is such poor quality art. It doesn't connect the humanity of the artist to the humanity of the one receiving the art, or it doesn't serve the one receiving the art in a human way, because it's the craft isn't good.
I don't think it's just the craft. I don't think, for instance, here's I don't think we know what virtue is or how to point to it. So my daughter doesn't communicate very well, but she does communicate in a way that I can see and observe the things that she is trying to communicate. She's like, "Daddy, water." Oh, okay. Now it's not poetry, but I can get the girl some water. She can be satisfied through drinking.
Yeah.
But if she doesn't know what it is to ask for, then I don't ever get a chance to help her get the thing that she needs, and we don't have a way to communicate. So I don't think we know what virtue is.
That's totally true. We don't know what virtue is, and we are too Gnostic to learn the craft, because craft is something that you develop historically, right? It's not a set of ideas. It's so.
Don't you have to have virtue to even develop the craft, though?
You do, yeah. So there's two. You have to have the virtue, but you can have the virtue and not know it. So you meet people that they work really, really, really hard, and then what they want to do is they want to say, "Well, I'm just a genius," and the labor is not important. They don't realize they've got a virtue, right? So
interesting.
You can have the virtue without knowing it. What the virtue
Define
is?
Virtue.
Well, so virtue is knowing, is doing right in knowing what is right and then doing what is right in particular situations. So being able to identify the situation you're in, know what's right, and do what's right. So
yeah, we don't have that.
We don't. It's similar to wisdom. It's like the moral. It's all the moral parts of wisdom. So because wisdom is the ability to live well in the world God made. So there's a lot of aspects of wisdom that aren't necessarily a moral question. Like, should you make sure to change the oil in your car every 5,000 miles? Like, you should. That's wise in dealing with the way that God made the world, and dealing with your donkey well, or your car well. And there's but you can have somebody who is immoral who takes really good care of their car, and you don't say, right, well, at least he takes good care of his car, right? Because it's not a moral. That's not a moral question. Virtue is when you take all the aspects of wisdom that have to do with morality, right and wrong, and say, this is in a situation involving right and wrong, knowing what is right in that situation, and then being able to do it is being virtuous.
Boy, that's going to take a lot of stuff to develop virtue. Like, it's going to take a lot of time to develop that, because you need to know things. You need to be able to understand what is right and wrong. You're going to, the moral backing is, it's kind of where, I'm going to bring the stuff that's on the side of the table and bring it into the conversation. And I think this is a good place to do it. The more that I've been reading the Moynihan report that was delivered in 1965 of the Negro family, the collapse of the Negro family. He wrote that for Johnson's administration, I believe.
Okay.
And then I've been going back. Egalitarianism has been, since last year, something that's really, I've understood that's kind of the core problem that we have. But as I'm reading Rothbard on egalitarianism, he points me to another book, the one that I sent you, where he starts talking about communism and the infiltration of communism in American society underneath Roosevelt.
Right.
And Jason, we had what's his name? Frank Furter, who was a Supreme Court justice, was a communist, and he taught at Harvard Law School, and he's getting people from Harvard to come inside the government. And the New Deal is all a way for communists to come into American society and control it through labor unions.
Yep.
And I'm like, they had so many communists inside of the American government that when they were recruiting, when certain factions were recruiting for communists, they were bumping into other people that were already a part of another faction of communism inside the American government.
It's really, it's crazy. We were so close to becoming the USSR.
I mean, it's mind blowing. And Roosevelt, there's a line in there that said Roosevelt he wasn't a communist. He didn't care so much about communism or anything else. He only cared about really being elected again. And there's a line in there that was like, if Roosevelt thought that cannibalism would get him new votes, he would have plumped up a missionary in the back of the White House.
That's a good line, right? But yeah, it's totally true. Roosevelt, he wanted to stay at the top of the heap, period.
Third time president. I get it.
Yeah. And what's amazing is it's the same people infiltrating. You have the same people that are praising the Russian Revolution, praising the Communist Revolution. They're out there, really hustling, especially with the labor unions. But they are Machiavellians to the core, and so they go to the highest power they can get to and gather as much power there. And that is and that really, I mean, if it weren't for well, what the best, where's that book? The best book on it that you'll read that gives you the details is called
are you talking about
it's called here it is, Blacklisted by History. It's hiding behind my
I have that audio book.
It's hiding behind my Hellboy. Blacklisted by History. So, and it's just about Senator Joe McCarthy. Basically, I mean, what happens is the USSR becomes our ally to defeat the Nazis because the Nazis attack the USSR. The USSR would have left the Nazis alone because they were nationalists and the USSR is internationalist. So if you get some national socialism, it's easier to take over national socialism and be able to just internationalize it. But Hitler's running out of gold, and the closest gold deposit is in Russia. So he just turns his forces north and charges into Russia in the winter and is completely destroyed that direction. And so there's the foolishness of Hitler, but it's also the fact that socialism requires theft. Like it requires theft. And who are you going to rob from? Well, the Russians had the largest deposit of gold, so
and it seemed like an easier target because they're not suspecting him. We're all together on this, right? And so
and it had worked in France. It had worked because they had the super speed tanks. Nobody else had them. They were able to just basically roll in, do an end run around. World War I, everybody made stationary blockades, and then fought between blockade to blockade until one of them won. Well, the Russians the Germans had built high speed tanks, and so they were able to just get in their tanks and do an end run around the blockade and then trap the army between their own blockade and the tanks.
You can do blockade with the tank,
yeah. So it had worked, and Russia still had all of the blockades. What Hitler didn't take into account was the Russian winter, and then the size of the population, right? So, and the willingness of the USSR to just throw people at them, and trained, untrained, everything, throw people at them. And the Russians are famous for putting guns behind their own army. You can either take a chance hope and try to survive charging against the other army, or you can guarantee your death by retreating. So, but that made the USSR our allies. What we did historically is we took in allies, and we took people. We grabbed people from our allies and put them into our governmental system so that we could communicate easily. What we didn't understand was that the communists were co-belligerents, not allies. We happen to have the same enemy, but they still viewed us as an enemy. We stopped viewing them as an enemy for the purposes of the war, and then we had victory together, and we said, "Hooray! Now we and our allies have defeated." And they said, "Now we have all sorts of spies embedded throughout the U.S." And then you also had a severe breakdown. We didn't know how to, between World War I and World War II, we didn't know how to reintegrate soldiers. And that led to a generation that had been detached from their parents. The communism builds on rivalry, especially intergenerational rivalry. They stole from you. Now go take it back. We're gonna go get it back for you. That it's envy and rivalry, and you had the breakdown of the family because of the lack of reintegration of all those fathers. And then so that left us really open to communism. And then they were so, quote unquote, so far away that we didn't believe that there would actually be a communist infiltration, because it's hard, because we didn't do that sort of thing, right? America historically has been non-interventionist. We didn't,
right?
We didn't. So now we're not, right? Now our CIA we are no longer a non-interventionist country. We fund all sorts of terrible stuff through our attempt to intervene. And I mean,
I think that you have to embrace the communist worldview in order to be able to do that, right? Like if you have to. So here, and this is what are you going to say? I want to read this quote from Chambers.
Whitaker Chambers.
Yeah.
Read that one, because there was a backlash from communists into conservatism in the 40s. That's really important in terms of the overall what ended up being the destruction of conservatism. So, but Whitaker Chambers.
This is from his book Witness. This is another book that I recommend too. But Chambers relates that all the New Dealers he knew were communists or near communists who regarded the New Deal as an instrument for gaining their revolutionary ends, and not as in the end and of itself. For some time, Chambers himself thought of the New Deal as a benevolent reform movement, but he later realized, he recalls, that it was a genuine revolution whose deepest purpose was not simply reform within the existing traditions, but a basic change in social and, above all, power relations within the nation. It was a revolution by bookkeeping and lawmaking rather than violence, but a revolution is always an affair of force. However, the force may disguise itself.
As benevolence. Yeah. It was, meaning that it was a gathering of power, right? You ended up with a federal government doing things that it didn't do before, right? So
everything we have now is New Deal based. Everything is New Deal based.
Everything, and you actually can't exist in the business world without running up against it. Like it's impossible, because it is now so significantly embedded into the IRS's systems that we are a New Deal people now. And so many conservatives are just arguing that we go back to it. They're not arguing that they think of it now as the tradition that we are trying to conserve, the American way that we do things. But why is the federal government spending all this wasteful money on these programs over here? Can't we get back to just building infrastructure like we usually do? You think,
Well,
no, that's actually the New Deal. That
that's
is
actually
the beginning. that
you know.
that's actually the problem, right? That's the root. That's how it got in. That's how this fascist communist mentality got into our federal system,
So
into the
go ahead.
machinery.
So I've been reading this book by Murray Rothbard on it's egalitarianism and the revolt against nature. And so in this book, he talks about the idea that, so this is going right along with what you're saying. All of it is, we look at the American titans, Ford, Carnegie, Rockefeller, and we look at that as the central point of capitalism. And America's like, wow, that was it. The way that Rothbard talks about this is that we think that it was the progressives ultimately that brought in this kind of communist attitude into society, but really it was the business and titans who did. So
Right.
Because of the competitiveness and the capitalism in the market that was there, they were all afraid of the competition that would actually come, which is why you had them trying to buy out presidents and do other things, because they were really trying to control the market of capitalism. And they were like, wait, we could actually get somebody else opens up a business. There's real competition here. They could take us out. And so what they ultimately did, our titans, our big business, Carnegie and those guys, went to the federal government under regulations that they could manage and control for the purpose of controlling the market.
Yeah.
And so
to keep the competition out.
Keep the competition out, not to be under legislation so that they can be fair about employment. That wasn't what it was. It was about keeping everybody else from being able to be in the competition. There's Carnegie that says, look, man, regardless of how you feel about it, the money is safe, whether or not the government has it or I have. Like the money is safe. I got the money. Even though that they might regulate it, it's still mine. So they're going to win one way or the other. They just don't have to have competition in it. And that cycle just keeps going over and over again.
Yeah.
And so,
and then they say, you know what we need? We need an environmental protection agency so that we can, and so they establish things like the EPA as a way of making it too expensive for anybody coming in to become a competitor, right? So you can, through the EPA, you can force an upgrade, every 2 years you have to upgrade all of the pumps at the gas station. Well, a mom and pop shop can't do that. They can't afford to drop 20 grand, 30 grand, 40 grand on a new pump every couple of years. Conoco can, because they control things from the pump from the ground to the pump, from the drill to the pump. So they can afford that, and it benefits them for the EPA to pass that sort of legislation, because then they can go to the mom and pop shop and say, well, hey, we'll buy you out. And they don't have to build the infrastructure. Somebody else builds the infrastructure and loses money, and they gain it. And it benefits the federal government, because now you've only got a handful of corporations to control. You don't have anybody that is not under your control.
So then Rothbard makes the argument that there's no monopoly in a truly capitalistic market. The monopoly comes in when you have the government that starts making these regulations that keep certain people out of it. Now you have monopoly. So now the mom and pop store, how do they compete in this when the government has control? So you got fascism at the highest level.
Yeah.
Right. I remember you said this before. You said everything is fascism now. Like it's just left fascism or right fascism, but everything is fascism now. And I didn't understand that. I was like, okay, but it really, really is, until you remove all the regulations and the red tape, and the lie is, oh, how will we conserve? How will we take care of would we manage taking care of the planet and people not over steamrolling others out of the business, and managing the health of people, just not taking advantage of the land, right? And just abusing it. Well, they need it. They need it to work for them. They need it so that they can have it. Work the other way around, where you have the farmers who were told, "Hey, kill all these pigs. We'll give you money for them." Right? Like
Yeah.
this literally
We'll,
happened.
we'll
You
pay
know?
you to dump all of the milk, right?
Right.
Because milk is too affordable. We need milk to be more expensive, and so the government can pay people to burn their grain, dump the milk, because they're trying to control the price, not by keeping it down. They're trying to control the price by keeping it up, right? They want the price up because they're trying to keep the dollar from deflating to a natural level, because their whole plan is to keep inflating the dollar as a way of taking the value from people that have less and giving it to people that have more, and for the government's control. I mean, inflation is not unavoidable. Inflation benefits some people over against others, and so the people in charge, if it's going to benefit them, then they want to control it and inflate it. So if you can get milk for 75 cents a gallon, then the value of the dollar goes up rather than down, and that doesn't benefit fascists.
So, Jason, this is the crazy thing. I'm not as worried about the World Economic Forum anymore as I am about my own American government. Right? Like that is when I started reading this, I'm thinking, so did we ever well, yeah. Did we ever I don't know if we ever with all so the New Deal, I'm getting here because I'm watching how certain economic structures have destroyed the black family, right? So I'm looking at the Moynihan report. He picks up on this in 1965 and says, whoa, the black family is collapsing in America in the ghettos. Something is going on. It's broken here, and it's going to happen to the rest of American society if we don't figure this out. And he realizes the home is the biggest problem. Well, Charles Murray is already ahead of this. You know, he's seeing the same thing happen in American society as well. And it's like how we're really losing the war, or something like how we're really losing it, the war that we're really losing. I'll have to find the exact title. So he's writing about this a while ago as well.
I haven't read that one. Charles Murray is brilliant.
This one is called, I'll find it and give it to you exact title because it's kind of important. So, I got the audio book of it. Losing Ground.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I haven't read that one.
I think that's Murray. Let me see.
I have an Audible credit too.
Yeah. Yeah. Charles Murray, Losing Ground, American Social Policy from 1950 to 1980. So he's going to hit that too. So Jason, here's my question. Did we ever clean the house? Because if you have all these New Deal social policies that come in, I mean, every sort of policy, they had all sorts of new groups over farmers, over worker labor unions. These communists came in and took over labor unions. Like, people were running, trying to find a labor union that wasn't communist, and they couldn't find one. They had to create new unions. And then communists came in and took over those unions. So with all these new entities that had developed out of the New Deal with the American government that were backfilled with communists, did we actually get the communists out, or did we actually people change the idea of, because remember, communism is bad. Nobody wanted to be a communist, but we changed the American social structure to where it became an American idea, not communism, right? But it was absolutely communism, and I just don't know if we ever got all of them out of there.
But what happened was in the 40s, you had two things happen kind of simultaneously. So in the late 40s, going into the 50s, you had a collapse within the Communist Party, and a whole bunch of communists switched to conservatives. Whittaker Chambers is one of them, but he actually became a Christian. There's a difference between becoming a conservative and becoming a Christian.
Facts.
They didn't all become Christians, right? And Whittaker Chambers his conversion was away from a Machiavellian worldview, right? So a lot of the communists that left communism and joined the Conservative Party remained Machiavellians, but they just became conservative. Same cosmology, same understanding of power, different goals. So that happened. There's a really great book. It's just called The Machiavellians, and it's about the communists leaving and becoming conservatives in the 40s and 50s and bringing a Machiavellian understanding with them into the conservative movements of America. It's tragic and eye-opening. And this guy's saying it's a good thing. So that's one of the things that's interesting is he's saying the Machiavellians saved the Conservative Party because they're the ones that brought a reality embracing politic. It's called real politic. They brought that into the Conservative Party, and so then the Conservative Party finally started understanding that you have to actually play the game according to the rules to win. And so the Machiavellian takeover of the Conservative Party that happened in the 50s and the 60s is a really important thing to understand. But the other thing that happened was you had Senator McCarthy, who was a man of incredible backbone. He was basically willing to sacrifice his own political career to dislodge as many communists as he could. And he did. At the highest levels, there were communists, and he was able to identify them. And then through, so he was able to identify them through a couple of ways. The Verona Project had broken the code of the USSR's radio code. And so, but they didn't tell anybody. So he was actually receiving and knowing who was a real communist, who had what orders and what, but he had to pretend that they didn't have that information. And so he had to basically go through a whole theatrical process to make it look like he was stumbling upon these communists on accident. It's really, and it destroyed his own political career, but he was willing to do it because he knew it was the right thing to do.
Why did it destroy his career? Because people thought he was doing witch hunts or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. So they call it the Red Scare, witch hunts, banana trials. They'd bring people in and say, you were in this meeting for communists. Who else was in the meeting with you? And they knew exactly who was in the meeting. They were just trying to make it look like they publicly stumbled upon this person. And so then once they got that person named, then they would bring him in, say, here's the evidence that they're a communist, lay it out. And almost every single time, the person just quit their job and walked away. Right. There were a couple of people that they were able to prove, look, here's the evidence, and Whittaker Chambers was a big part of that. Here is somebody that is willing to go on the record and say this person is actively trying to undermine the United States, and they put them in jail. But there's only a couple people. Most people, they quit their jobs and immediately got hired in Ivy League universities.
Oh,
and right, so they went to Harvard, they went to Yale, they went to these Ivy League universities. And they trained up the next generation of lawyers. They trained up the next generation of teachers. And so that's why you have this stalled moment that communism suddenly shows back up in force again in the 80s and 90s. But it's because all of these communist spies went to the universities and said, just give us another generation or two. But
Jason, if just because you identify the communists and you get a cleaning of the house, this sounds like Leviticus, and where it's like, hey, you come in, you clean the house, but if you don't fill it, then you get 7 more. Yeah. And
right.
You see Jesus doing that, but in the temple as well. But if just because you clean the house, doesn't mean that you got everybody. And it doesn't mean that because the institutions were created by the communists in order to be able to operate, even if they weren't there. So no one destroyed any of the institutions.
Well, I think though it's because of that Machiavellian view.
Oh, the conservatives.
You cleaned the power structures. You didn't clean the house. Right. So they said we got them out of the power structures in their mind. Who has the power to affect reality? They said we've got them out of those positions. We'll just put them where they don't have any power, as professors in universities. Right. Because they thought they had cleaned the house. They actually what they did is they said, it's like saying, well, we got rid of the communist. Instead, he's no longer running our he's no longer running the economic. He doesn't have the checkbook anymore. Instead, he's raising the kids. So we're safe now.
or it's like what we do now. We kind of do that. It's like, well, we got rid of the bad woman pastor, but this new woman pastor is actually extremely biblical.
Right. Well, you don't actually you haven't actually said, you haven't actually made a change. All you've done is delayed the inevitable at that point.
This is Lord of the Rings, bro. This is Lord of the Rings. Like, this is Tolkien. It's like, you got to destroy the ring, my guy. Like,
yeah.
You got to destroy the ring.
And I think that what you have, what we're seeing now is, if it's like saying, oh man, I've got an infection, and so you put a Band-Aid on it, and the skin starts to heal, but you don't actually get rid of the infection, and so it gets into the blood, and then next thing you know, you've got an infection everywhere in the whole body. That's what happened with it, and it's all the way down at the most basic levels of the way we approach everything, right? It's a cosmological and a metaphysical. It's been institutionalized. It's a cosmology and a metaphysic that has been institutionalized, which is why you've got to say that this begins with how we educate our kids. If we don't start by saying we got to fix the way we're educating our kids, my kids, right? You not like all the kids in the whole city. You don't have access to all of that yet. How am I raising my kids to grow up and with an understanding of reality, right? Doesn't that says I actually believe in reality. I am purposefully living in reality rather than what we have, what is being told to people, right? That they can control reality, that they, rather than gratefully embracing and receiving reality as a gift.
Which this is, if you can have a communistic, egalitarian concept and idea of the world, which is what this is, then you think that because communism, its idea is to remake a human. It's to social engineer a different type of being out of a human. And it's all trying to get back to the garden, honestly, without God, without Christ, right? That's what they're trying to do. And so re-engineering a human being so that you can get the sin out of him so that he doesn't sin anymore. So you can have this utopia. And that's just not, you don't do this without Christ. You have to have Christ to do this, but they're trying to do this anyway. But when you can see that you can you think you can reshape reality by the way you have the government and all the power accumulated. Now you can see why they can reshape the idea of what is a man and what is a woman. Right. So, because you have to completely so this isn't, we're looking so close, like these are the things that are directly in front of us that's caused this, but there's something else that's way back, way back here. And the things that we need, and the reason I'm understanding this, okay, so then how do you fight? If you know that the federal government is controlling and the communist ideas controlling through the New Deal and all of the different entities and bureaucracy that was puffed up and created because of this is controlling all the way down to your farming and your food, and everything is fascism. What do? You buy a cow? You buy chickens? How do you? There has to be a way to break, because you got to break the system. Like, you got to starve the system out from needing it. Like, if Black people just were to stay married and would not take federal aid, that's how they were overcoming the government before the New Deal. And some of them were winning after. Actually, if you look at,
that's Black Wall Street. I think that's the difficulty, because you look at Black Wall Street and you say, well, that's what you do. But then what do you do when then they come in and burn it down?
Right. That's always
the problem, right? Like,
and they will.
I think they absolutely will. And so this is the problem. I work at a company that is literally saying we're helping build the parallel economy. But yeah,
right.
That's what Black Wall Street was, and it was working. The problem is they came in, they burned it down. So I am actively working to help build the parallel economy, and at the same time, I know the history of how these things work, right? So say, but that doesn't mean you don't do what's right because it's right. You absolutely do, but they're fighting reality, and you have to say, okay, they're fighting reality. I'm not, and I know that I'm doing this by faith, right? The world is a covenant world, is built on covenants and of covenants. So you keep covenant by faith. We are justified by faith individually. We're corporately justified by faith. If there's any justification that needs to happen, it's by faith. That's how covenants work. And I think this is the error. I think we'll talk the theology another time.
What you about to?
So you have
what you about to say? Come on, spill it. You can't do that to me. You know you don't do that here.
Yeah, no, I know. So I think you see this a lot in the arguments between Baptists and Paedo-Baptists, where they look at each other and they're like, "Look, we both agree that we're justified by faith alone, right? We're all evangelical Protestants, and then as soon as you start talking about corporate justification, you've got one group that denies it, that it's a thing, right. And another group that says no, it's a thing, but it's by works." Like our individual justification is by faith, but then our corporate justification is somehow by works. Other people deny that there is such thing as corporate justification, and so we end up saying it's by works because it's invisible, right? We don't see the corporate justification as something that God is doing, and so because of that, our default, because of the heart of man, because of the dust of Adam that flows in our veins, we will try and justify ourselves by works if we're not aware of the gospel bringing a corporate justification by faith. And
is that because we don't know how theology or how biblical doctrine works in the civil realm? So we've had this dichotomy between the two so much that we have no way of seeing how these two work together, actually.
Right, that you can have that an institution can have a jurisdiction that it is required to be faithful in, and so as a family, can my family be justified before the Lord? Say, well, yeah, of course, right? Is it justified by works? No, absolutely not. Covenants aren't kept that way. It's a covenant. Justification is by faith, and it's a covenant because it's a covenant justification, right? So is my family it, so
Well, that's
the
First
same
Corinthians.
thing.
That's 1 Corinthians 7, right?
Yeah,
That's
First
what that
Corinthians.
is.
And then what is the job of the institution? The job of the institution is to imitate Christ, right? That's the other thing is imitate Jesus. Jesus is the husband of husbands. He's the King of Kings. He's the Lord of Lords. He's the husband of husbands. And in First Corinthians, when it says the father is the head of the son, the husband is the head of the wife, and Christ is the head of and then Christ is the head of man. Right? It sets up 3 different relationships. One of them, Jesus is the head, and one of them, Jesus is the subject. And then it says, and then the husband and the wife both have Jesus to imitate in the relationship of husband and wife, where you've got a covenant head and a covenant subject. Jesus is a covenant head. Jesus is also a covenant subject. And so Paul is laying out how Jesus is the one that we imitate no matter where we are in the covenant relationship, right? No matter which
Master,
role
servant,
we hold.
child, mom, dad. Yeah.
Jesus has been them all because he is the perfect human. He's the one that we imitate, right? We're made in the image of God. He's so.
Why haven't I put this together so well before? Oh, it's so good. He's been them all.
It's all but it's right there in the details. What we want to do because of our Gnostic modernism, what we do is we want to stack them all from top to bottom, right? Where when they're being laid out side by side, we then rearrange them from what Paul actually gives us. And we want to stack them top to bottom and say, Father, Jesus, husband, wife, as if that's but that's not, that is literally not what he says. He gives 3 separate relationships side by side. It's in the section where he's talking about imitate Christ. And so he says, husbands and wives are both, you have Jesus is your model for how to be good, whether good at your role, whether you're the covenant head or the covenant subject. And so we embrace covenants by faith. We keep covenant by faith. It's not by works. And the works always flow out of the covenant. The covenant faithfulness always flows out of the faith. So, and whether it's our corporate justification, whether it's whatever institution it is that is standing before the Lord, whether it's our individual justification, it's the justification of our children, whatever it is, it's always by faith that we are that covenants are kept. And so,
can I jump in right here real quick?
It's never by works, so there's never anything that we can boast about. It's always something that at the end of the day we say thank you for, top to bottom.
I've been living that comment since we talked about the generosity. This is the kind of world that is an overflow of Trinitarian love, right? That's what kind of world we live in. I've been using that since. The other thing that ever since I've read J. Gresham Machen on what is faith, one of the questions that I'm asking myself now is, what does faith look like in this situation?
Right.
Because
what is the promise that I have here?
Yeah. And then so when you go and you read the Hall of Faith, you got to see that having faith did something. It was a reaction, right, to having it. You believe God gives you that faith, and then you operate on that. You do the thing that faith requires, right? So we think that these two are separate in one way or another, but they're not. Having faith operates, right? James says, you say you have faith, but then you don't have any works, right? And I'll show you my faith by my works, right? And it's this thing where now I'm asking myself, okay, what does faith look like in the situation? And depending on what situation it is, it always looks different for kind of everybody else, but you're operating within the promises of God, doing what is required of you and how you should be act. So virtue, right? What does faith look like standing in virtue? Well, sometimes it's not putting on a mask. Sometimes it's going out and singing psalms, right? That's what faith looks like, right? Faith looks like taking your son up to the mountain to kill him, right? That's what faith looks like.
Yeah. And so you've got knowing that God raises the dead.
Right. And so it's always being obedient in the moment to what God has required of you. And that's why everything is operating in faith. Well, what does faith look like to be a civil magistrate? Right. Okay.
Yeah. What there's a, I think a lot about the number of times that in the moment a faithful servant of the Lord looks like he failed, but then it turns out that he didn't. So Polycarp
Athanasius
lost. Yeah, Athanasius lost. Polycarp was burned at the stake.
Yeah,
but he actually collapsed the Roman Empire. Like that section of the Roman Empire didn't survive killing Polycarp. Alcuin, I think, is a really good example. So he was brought on by Charlemagne as an advisor, and he was the one who established Christian schools all throughout the empire that Charlemagne paid for. Charlemagne said, as a Christian emperor, I should want an educated populace, as many people being able to read the Bible as possible, because who knows where our best pastors are going to come from. Charlemagne also used to conquer people and say, you can either be baptized or die, right? Those are your options. Alcuin advised him against it, a number of times, and tried to get him to stop, and he never did. Alcuin failed. The letters that Alcuin wrote, though, ended up becoming central to the argument against that in English law. Right? So the reason, religious freedom in
David
English
Fowler's
law,
going to love that.
the letters to Charlemagne were entered into the argument for religious freedom, right? So for the that you can be a non-baptized citizen, that is so he won, right? So because theologically he was right, he lost the political argument in his day, but then when Alfred goes to put together his law code, he enters in Alcuin's advice in as an argument for why he is establishing religious freedom. So which meant that when he defeated the pagans, he gave them the option of you can stay if you want to get baptized, or you can go, right? You're not gonna stay here because you've been trying to undermine this Christian kingdom, but I'm not going to kill you, right? Because someday your kids are going to get saved, which is exactly what happened, right? So you end up with some of them actually choosing, well, actually, a king like this, if I could get baptized and have a king like this, that's way better than going back to the Viking tyranny. So if my options are this man Alfred, who's a good king, all I have to do is be baptized, and then he will accept me as a full citizen. So you have this amazing moment that it's not exactly that clean, though, because within less than 100 years, all of the people that were baptized by force were the ones that argue that Charlemagne should be considered a saint. So like the children and grandchildren of the forced baptisms by Charlemagne are the ones that want to make sure that he's considered a hero, because their life was so significantly changed, because he didn't just say, hey, get baptized.
Stockholm syndrome. It's just Stockholm syndrome.
So
That's all
they
it
got
was.
baptized, and then he paid to make sure their children got an education. If any of them wanted to be lawyers, he made sure that they could become lawyers. If you were his, if you got baptized, then he basically considered you like one of his own children and made sure. We don't have it. We don't have a cosmology in which a good man can have an error in thinking like that, but because he actually is enacting the love of Christ, that he can say, hey, get baptized or else. They say, okay, I'll get baptized. And he said, welcome to the family. You have all the rights of every single person, even though it was under duress that they chose to join the family. I mean, we don't have, like, I don't think we don't have that sort of understanding. We don't have a cosmology that could support that kind of weight, so that their children and grandchildren are writing poetry in praise of Charlemagne. But
I just think it sounds like baptism works. That's all I heard. Baptism works. That's
well, baptism always works by faith.
Yeah. That's good. So Jason, I got to run here in a second, and I don't want to because it's still getting to the point where I know it's about to get really, really good. But you started talking about how our whole American system, we don't even know. We think we're living in a capitalistic free market. We are not. We are not in any way. Like, it's not. There's still parts of it that can work, and we got some operation to move. But this is, this system is really tainted. We don't know to what degree, but it really is. By the grace of God, the world in reality is unavoidable, right? Like you're going to bump into it. But when you have something like this, that the institutions are still driving, and of communism is inside of our institutions in a very real way, where it's just common now. We've grown up underneath that type of environment the best freedom that we can think of is the Reagan years, right? Like that's what we think.
And there was actually some rolling back in good ways of some things during the Reagan years. You also had the expansion of the military and the powers of the CIA in bad ways at the same time. And we don't live in this, both, you can't, we want to blame everything on the president one way or the other all the time. And we actually don't live in that kind of system. So you can have a good man pushing things in the right way and bad things happen. You can also have somebody that is a good man that doesn't get certain things. And so the expansion of he knew to fight the USSR, you had to expand the military. There's no plan put in place to de-escalate once you won, and that is still with us to this day. That's a problem.
So how do we get out of it? Okay, so we got education. So how do we get out of this? Because you got to break the system.
An important part is you got to raise up the next generation. Right. So who do you have a responsibility to help understand what virtue is, and to make those distinctions in wisdom between craft and virtue. Can somebody, if you've got somebody that's really good at their craft, but they're not teaching virtue, for hundreds of years, this is what classical education was about, right? You read Homer because he's the three greatest poets in history. He's one of the three greatest poets. You've got David, Homer, and Shakespeare, three greatest poets of history. And I don't think you can make an argument. You could maybe put Dante in there. So you've got these greatest poets of history, and Homer is one of them, and he's a pagan. And we used to study him for and discuss virtue. What parts of this are craft and which parts of this are virtue? How do we and so from a young age you were practicing pulling pulling apart with your imagination virtue and beauty and understanding the relationship between them, and you've got this great the force of Homeric poetry is undeniable, right? When you learn to read poetry and then you go read Homer, it's undeniable the force of his poetry. The question is always, what's the argument? Is Hector the good guy? Is Achilles the good guy? Are either of them good guys? Are they bad guys? Or are they mixed characters? What's the virtue? What's the true virtue? What's the false virtue? What's the lies they're telling themselves? That's how we learn to see, to identify the time that we're in, so we know what the virtue is by exercising our imagination throughout our lives with the use of fiction, poetry, history, and then discussing it with other men and women, and exercising the imagination towards virtue. That used to be what an education was, it was about. Well, let's start giving that to our kids again, right? And so,
well, we're doing.
We got to get it ourselves.
It's not.
We got to give it to our kids. Right. So it's just that I think is really, really at the heart and the center. I've been meeting with a local master teacher to talk about this stuff, and just say, okay, what does it take to just say, get as many people this education as we can, right? Because you've got these master teachers that have gone out and done the work, and now they're ready to give the education, but we're our systems are still catching up. So that's at the heart of it. But then, man, here's the other thing. I was Chrysostom. He says that if you want to overcome your enemy, join yourself to them. You are yeast. Yeast is no good if it is not joined to the loaf. Right. So we need businesses. We need men that say, I'm starting a business. Let's charge in. Let's do this. Talking to a gentleman last night who has a dog training business, so passionate about it. How do we learn to train dogs like Christians and think like Christians about dog training? And it was such a fun conversation. You see folks charging in, but so I was in New York over the weekend and just searched live poetry, right? So Marcus and I bounced through a bunch of places trying to find some live poetry. The only place that normally does live poetry was renting itself out for a drag show when we showed up, which was funny because Marcus and I walked into a drag show. That was really funny. It was the poetry club. And, chiasm. So, but we found one place. They didn't have any live poetry going on at the time, but it was up in the Bronx, and it was cool bookshop. And it was a black owned, black neighborhood, and so a lot of I picked up a cool August Wilson to complete my August Wilson collection. I think I've got all of his stuff now. He's a great playwright, great screenwriter, but Marcus, he walked around, and so I go straight to the poetry section every time, right? And go through it. He walked around and he's like, "There's no business books here." I said that they need business books here. This neighborhood needs business books, right? And Marcus is absolutely right. If you've seen the Wu-Tang Chronicles, the thing that made the difference for the Wu-Tang was you had RZA, and then his brother was a janitor on Wall Street, and he would hurry to get his work done, and he would spend the last hour of his shift reading in reading the business books that were all throughout this Wall Street high rise. And so he gave himself through in his overnight, overnight while he was janitoring, he would be vacuuming and reading business books, right? He gave himself a business education. So when he came back to RZA and RZA said, "Hey, we're going to start a super group," he said, "No, we're going to own a label. We're going to own the IP. We're going to own everything." He said, and I can do it because now he understood how business works. That was the difference maker. And Marcus was absolutely right. The biggest bookstore in the Bronx does not have a business section. That's not good for that neighborhood. And so I think you start saying, let's get into we start a business, we run it like Christians, and then we are free, generous with our business knowledge to other Christians, to whoever wants it, and say, here's how this is, and we're clear, like we get this is biblical business model. We're doing this because here's what the Bible says. We join ourselves to the current business sector, which is running on the wrong principles, and try and live according to the right principles, run our businesses according to the right principles, and trust that in reality, water flows downhill. You can't magic it uphill. So if we're running according to business practices, then it'll work. Biblical practices, it'll work. And then we're in a position to say, let's move away from fascism, or we move away from fascism because it's not working the way that it is over here.
So you get a Joseph, then it gets in the system and is like, okay, yeah, here's what we're gonna do.
And he says, the word of the Lord says.
Yeah. This is what was missed, I think, in the conversation about Crowder, and everybody was so disappointed that Crowder would record a telephone conversation that became the most important thing, and it wasn't the most important thing. And listen, don't get me wrong, he was wrong, and he shouldn't have did that. That was absolutely wrong. But so was Moses killing the Egyptian that was trying to persecute God's people. He was wrong, right? Like the FBI was wrong to be listening on Martin Luther King.
Right.
But what did he say?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
I'm sorry. What is he doing with how many women? I'm sorry. What? Now you're wrong, but don't miss that there's something bigger going on here. And so when he goes after the Daily Wire, he's making the case that the system is meant to operate a particular type of way. And if we keep operating underneath that structure and that system, we are going to lose. And it's the same way that all these, this is why I'm asking, like, while you're doing, like, you're creating business, I said, grab some cows and some chickens, but that really is the answer though. It's like, if you're good at, farming, then farm. Yeah, and don't sell to the government, right? Like, what do you do? What did Gideon do? He hid while he was, doing his thing. He's like, let me just go tread this out here. Yeah. Threshing and let nobody see what I'm doing. Go do your thing and build something great. And then when it's time, you're like, okay, here we go. You have to have, we need to be the kind of people that can be self-sufficient or skilled in whatever we do, so that, we can have the ear of the king, or we can get in those positions, or in the way that American system is set up, that we can have a culture that is self-sufficient. Right.
Yeah. Because we don't need the ear of the king here in the same sort of way. Right. So yet now we'll see how things go. Right. But, at this point that's not how it works. So, but what's so interesting is, like, I've been watching what Andrew's doing with Red Balloon.
Yes.
It's been what's been fascinating to me is he is, in a lot of ways, he's actually the enemy of Fox News. But they're fascinated by him, right? They're fascinated by what he's doing. They're giving him all sorts of press, but he is what he's doing is actually going to undermine them as well, but they can't help but talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
As you watch it, you think, what is going on? Well, Andrew's good at his job. He loves serving people. You hang out with him for 5 minutes and you're like, this is a guy that likes people, right?
He really does.
He's looking at people and he's like, man, these people, they need jobs that could change their life. What can I do to help? I'm going to throw my resources. I'm going to throw my personality. I'm going to throw my, my Christmas suit wearing joy, into this job of helping people get life-changing job changes. And because he's doing it well and he's doing it to serve people, and because it's literally changing people's lives, he's getting all of the press, even from the people that will be undermined by his success. And I think is shifting the conversation in significant major ways, even though that's not the primary thing that he's doing. The primary thing that he's doing is serving
loving
people,
his neighbor.
Loving his neighbor, and he's just doing it faithfully, and he's doing it as a Christian in public, and I think you see this with David Bahnsen as well.
Yeah,
he's a Christian in public. There's nobody doubts that, but he's really good at his job. He sees the system. He says, I get it. I understand how it works. I know how to be a Christian in this system, even though the system isn't perfect. So he is going to.
He never complains about the system. He like David Bahnsen. He not once has he complained about systems. Like, do you like the Fed? He's like, I can use it. Right? He just doesn't complain about the system. There isn't a system that he says he'll be like, okay, this one needs to go there. But he's like, the opportunity is in the individual, not in the system. Like, is the individual working? Is the individual engaging? Like, if you look at everything you've lost instead of what you currently have, you'll miss it. And he's like, we got a lot of opportunity. We got a lot of stuff, and people aren't even capitalizing on that. Just get to work and everything else will collapse, right? I think he really believes that.
But he's done the craft work of understanding the system, which is putting him into a position, or God has put him into a position where he will end up forming the system for the next generation as well, right? So he's got
a school that he teaches economics at, right? Like
that's what I'm saying, right? So that's what we don't, because we don't think long term. I mean, I know, I now having raised some teenagers and been one myself, one of the things that the proverb says is that the lazy man says there's a lion at the door, there's a snake on the floor, there's a lion in the street, there's a snake at the door, a lion in the street. There's always a reason besides my own inabilities or lack of craft or lack of work, or there's always some other reason for the failure. And you see this you see this a lot. Now it's being encouraged. The 1619 project, the BLM project, right? The system. It's the system. The system is opposed to you. The system is against you. You can't, right? There's no way for someone like you to learn the system and overcome it. That's a lazy man's excuse. And that is the church has fallen into that significantly in the last 2 generations. The conservative Christian church says, well, the system's not running according to biblical ideals. Well, of course it's not. What are you doing though with the system that you got? How do you, I was just, this is what's crazy. When we were in New York, Marcus and I we try to find underground comedy clubs, and just get our fingers on the pulse of what's going on. And, man, we found in both of them some of the funniest anti-trans jokes I've ever heard. Just like filled to the brim with it. Anti-cancel culture. They're constant anti-cancel culture jokes. Cancel culture was probably the main target if you'd say, well, what was the one thing that was held together, right? Well, they're all talking about cancel culture, making fun of it, mocking it. It's not real. You've got the subculture of the next generation of comics is already fighting it. It's not going to last
Thank
forever.
you, Dave Chappelle.
Yeah, you. Exactly. Well,
they weren't.
But funniest joke, the funniest comedian was interesting. There was one guy. You had some really crass comedians. You always do. They don't get a lot of laughs. They're the funniest guy, completely clean, beginning to end. He had the biggest laughs, and you didn't walk away saying like, "Wait." You walked away saying, "Wait, did he ever swear? He wasn't ever crass. He wasn't but you didn't notice because he was so good at his craft, right? He had worked on his craft. But another guy who was he had a couple of pedophile jokes that were really funny, like making fun of how pedophilia is becoming like not as gross to people, and he was making fun of that. But he had one joke where he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm dating a girl who's gender fluid, means that she wakes up in the morning and sometimes she's a girl, other times she wakes up and identifies as a guy, which means sometimes I get to hit her."
Oh, oh, that's brutal.
It's so brutal.
Oh.
But like that's a funny joke making fun of just that, because everybody goes, that it doesn't matter if she puts on jeans and cuts her hair short, you don't get to hit her. Like that's not allowed. So where it's like that's not how it works, but he knows that's not how it works, and that's what makes it funny. But the cancel culture has now become the man that the counterculture is already resisting. Right. So
interesting, right?
It's a huge opportunity for the Christians that have. I mean, the number of people that I've talked to now is almost to double digits. The number of people that I've talked to in the artistic communities that have said, "Well, you had guys like Crowder and Jordan Peterson, and who I know is not a Christian, but is are resisting the attempts to make everybody ignore reality."
Yeah.
And have ended up becoming a Christian because of it. Like literally gone and checked out churches because of Jordan Peterson and have said, "I think I'm becoming a Christian. I'm going to go find out," and then get saved. Like that's happening now. Yep. All we have to do is be willing to keep insisting that reality is reality, that virtue is virtue, and that those things are not up for grabs. I mean, it's such a small order of the day.
we were supposed to be talking about C.S. Lewis and the introduction to
Paradise Lost.
Lost from George Milton. Yeah, and we kind of did, but we didn't. But part of when you're talking about craft, that's one of the things that, as I'm halfway through the book now, C.S. Lewis carved. After you look at the stuff that's going on with the Grammys, and that artists are saying the only thing that gets through is shock value. So use shock value as much as you can to get the attention, to bring people over. And what you start realizing is that people get so used to the shock that you got to raise the value up a little higher and a little higher. And then when other artists see that this works, everybody jumps in to do that. And so we were like, why all of a sudden everybody's swearing in R&B? Well, it was a shock. It's like they didn't used to do that. That was like nobody wants to hear swear words in R&B. Shock value, shock value, shock value. Now people got numb to it. Now they got to have it in every 3 words that they say instead of every 15 or a hook, right? And so it just keeps going up. It's because, and then no one works on their craft anymore. They only figure out what is a new way to shock, right? Yep. And when I was reading C.S. Lewis, me and my wife were reading it last night, Paradise Lost. He starts breaking down and reminding me the beauty again of a person who is skilled to talk or skilled to communicate in their own genre, and what that does to the individual. I can't remember the line perfectly, but he basically says like it's one soul rescuing another soul. And
Right.
I was
And
like, oh man.
that's the art where I was trying when I'm talking to artists to say your job is to connect with a human, connect with you as the image of God. Your job is to create art that connects your image of God to their image of God, so that they're reminded of the image of God within them. But that's what good art does, and then encourages them towards goodness and beauty and virtue, and by making it beautiful. But if you don't connect, right? If you don't create art that connects, then it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. You could create art that helps people ask the right questions. You don't have to create art that gives answers all the time. Create art that just helps them ask the right questions, but you got to connect. And that's a craft issue, right? You
And
don't
not
get
just with shock.
not just, shock doesn't even really connect. I mean,
That's one of
shock
the things that
might
C.S. Lewis
make you
says in
look
there. Is
around
like,
a little bit, but it doesn't, there's a really great, we're going to be reading this year. We're reading, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and the author of The Rime of the Ancient Mariner has a really great essay on the use of shock value. But he just says, in a Christian context, it's limited. You have a very limited use of shock value, because it doesn't, unless you follow it up with something that actually connects, right? You
and
can wake
rises to the
somebody up.
level, right? Yeah.
But then you have to actually follow that with something that connects with them, or it's not of any use. And which is, that's what
Lewis says the same thing. He says the same thing in Paradise Lost. It's funny. I do need to read this because I need to finish reading Milton's Paradise Lost. But I started reading Paradise Lost and realized I don't have the faculties to really grasp this. Right. And Lewis is coming in and he's making me fall in love with the poetry again and the art of it. And, its own context and how it lives its own context. And what we've done in our culture is because of egalitarianism, everything's the same. Yeah. And what Lewis is doing in this book is saying everything is actually in its own category, in its own culture, in its own world, and it's different and it's at different levels and it needs to be treated as such. So he gives a metaphysical breakdown of poetry and poems and writing, and puts Milton in that same sort of metaphysic. And it's like, whoa. And all of a sudden, it's like he did one of those Tony Stark things where he has this little room where he's got this little ball and he blows it out and you see all the pieces inside of it. And that's what, and in the first couple of chapters, Lewis blows out poetry.
Have you gotten to the chapter called Hierarchy yet?
Oh, okay. Next week.
Let's talk about that chapter. I think it's just, he just says, here, let me tell you everything that's wrong with the modern world. Right.
Okay. We'll do that next week because we're still hitting hierarchy. I feel like we just need to pound it. And so I just got to this point where I start marinating on, I can't listen to music right now. I only listen to old stuff, so Lewis he kind of made me feel like I wanted to listen to music again. I wanted to enjoy poetry again. I want to go find some old hip hop where people were actually writing, and communicating, and the turn of a phrase was valuable. Because one of the things he does is like everybody in a modern era looks for a line. He's like, but poetry isn't just a line; it's actually a paragraph. It's in a whole. He's like trying to find a line in poetry is like finding a stone in a cathedral. Right. The cathedral is the thing you see, right? And so it's so good to get into that. Go ahead. And then I got to run.
We don't get symphonies anymore. We don't get cathedrals anymore. Because we don't have a cosmology that can support, and we don't get epic poetry anymore, right? Milton is the cathedral of poetry. You don't get that though, because we don't have a cosmology that can support it, that can justify its existence. It looks like waste to us. And so we get, and I listen to a lot of
You're right. It
music
does. Yeah,
that's
it does.
2-3 minutes, 3-minute songs, 4-minute songs, because those have a place, but we don't have to sit down and try and listen through a whole symphony. Feels like a waste of time, right? Because we don't have a cosmology that is a symphony, so it can justify it. We don't have a cosmology that is a that is an epic poem, that history is an epic poem, and so we can justify the investment that it takes. And we don't have a cosmology that is a cathedral that can justify us building one. So it's such a
you're so right about that. Yeah, this goes back to our conversation on communism and socialism. We have been in the waters and in the air and the culture of an idea that has tried to reshape man and says these aren't things that he needs. These aren't things that make him. This is why certain things have to be outlawed, and have to be yeah, we can't have that. Private education can't have that, because those things make a certain type of human, right? A person that sits down and enjoys and embraces a symphony and figures out how to write intelligently so that they don't have to use swear words, they don't have to use shock value, or they create a cathedral in their dialogue or their art so that you see it as a whole. Like, that's a different type of person.
Yep.
And it makes different kinds of people.
Makes different kinds of people. Somebody that can smoke an entire cigar and not just need the cigarette, right? The cigarette is the way of getting, you're trying to get to the use of tobacco as quick as possible, make it useful, and just get the nicotine in you as quick as possible, rather than thinking of the gift of a cigar. And I when I smoke a cigar, I know I'm talking too much and not listening enough, because if it goes out. The cigar is, you sit down with someone for a conversation, and it will tell you if you're dominating the conversation and not listening enough, because it goes out. If I have to relight it, then I'm say to myself, all right, you're talking too much. Open up your ears, ask some questions. That there's this
learn something.
Yeah, that you got images of God. You're sitting with images of God. What are you doing? Dominating the conversation. Ask some questions. So it's a complete different way of existing in the world, that says, what am I here for? Did you read that quote from Cyril that I sent you? Did you see that?
No, I didn't.
It's a Theodoret of Cyrus. He said, I got it. He's exchanging letters with a guy who's arguing against God,
oh yeah,
right?
I couldn't read it well because the text got blurry.
He says, mark another manifestation of his providence. The body provides the natural couch of the buttocks, so that you can make a seat out of the ground or a stone and not be hurt by sitting on bare limbs. You are ungrateful, notwithstanding. You fail to recognize the gifts and rave and rant against the wisdom that makes such provision for you. He's arguing with an atheist, and he says to the atheist, "What? Have you realized that you're sitting on your butt? You're not, and your butt is not like an elbow. That'd be uncomfortable. God made it so that you can turn anything into a couch because you got a cushion on your rear end." So your argument against God is simply ungratefulness.
You know what? I don't know how an atheist. I was telling my wife, like, an atheist has to work super hard at being an atheist. It really is a lot of work, because the world is overflowing with generosity. So I was like, when he gets married, like, if he sees a beautiful woman, like, how does he suppress all of that?
It takes an enormous amount of imaginative discipline to suppress the knowledge of God.
That is worse than constipation. Like, that's like, you know what I mean? Like, that's why they have to be so angry.
Totally. When you literally and Theodoret's point is, you're literally sitting on an argument for God's kindness.
Yeah.
No matter
Yeah,
where
your
you sit,
eyes, yeah, all of it.
your
Yeah.
rear end is an argument for God's kindness. Because
Oh man, it's so
imagine
good.
if your rear end was like elbows, that'd be uncomfortable.
If it
But
was
that's
like your
where,
head,
yeah, exactly. This is that. This is why I always point people to the ethics of Elfland, right? That because you can imagine your rear end like elbows. You can't imagine murder being good, but you can imagine your rear end being like elbows, and that makes you say thank you for the way
yeah,
for what reality is like. Or if you can imagine something better, if you can imagine a world where, I mean, this is what makes, I know Martin Luther King Jr. had his problems, but the "I Have a Dream" speech is a masterpiece of rhetoric, because he understands that we've got an imagination problem. Imagine a world this way. If you
mm-hmm.
can, you start to desire it, because a world that's
That's right.
better, when you begin imagining it, you start to desire it. I mean, that's what good art should do. It connects with other people, and then it influences their imagination to say the world could be a better place, which influences your desires, right? So that's or what a good tragedy does. You imagine yourself in the place of Hamlet, making the sort of decision that you make, and that he makes, and you say, oh, what if I stopped making my decisions out of bitterness? What would that
Oh
look
man,
like? Oh, that'd be great. So,
I gotta run, man. That's so
all right.
good. I hate to leave because I know it's just now getting good. All right, we'll talk about this next week.
Yeah, talk about hierarchy next week.
Hierarchy next week. All right, man.